G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and most importantly, it is a Friday, so I hope that you're enjoying the end of the week and gearing up for a great weekend. Now, I've given Bez a pig's ear and I can hear him enjoying that down the hallway here, so we will see if he comes and interrupts the video. Of course, there's no problem with that, but legends, as always, we have a lot to go over. Now, Deep State Map, they updated their map after my video went live yesterday, so we will have two updates, both yesterday's and today's on Deep State, and then I've got a number of other maps to show you as well from other neutral and Russian sources too, so we can overlay these. And the reason we overlay these is because if all the maps are showing a movement, then we can go, yep, bang, there is the movement. Because, of course, there is incentive for Russian maps not to show Ukrainian gains and vice versa. I want to talk about oil strikes, as we have seen a large depot for oil, then at least it's looking like it's taken a pause. We know there's been a lot of strikes against gas and oil facilities recently from Ukrainian drones. I want to look at Ukrainian drones as well, actually. I want to talk about the European Union potentially returning to Russian gas, and I want to talk about Romania and the presidential elections there, what is happening there, and what that is telling us about politics in the West in general. There's a lot to go over in that. So look, let's start with the miscellaneous folder. So we have seen photographs come out of this. Now, this is said to be on a Ukrainian drone in the Bryansk region, striking then energy facilities from Russian energy facilities here. And this is basically a Soviet fab bomb underneath a drone with also 120mm mortar shells as well, just to add a bit more bang. I can't tell if this is some sort of release or just holding it there also, but these have a hell of a lot of bang in them. I'm sure you're all familiar with how destructive fabs are, from the 250s, 500s, all the way to 3000s, and this is the type of drone that these will be on. This is a fab underneath. It's a civilian light aircraft rigged up to be remote controlled with the bomb underneath it, and potentially as well mortar rounds on its wings. And there's a lot of pros to this. One, these are readily available and cheap as well. Radars may pick this up as just a civilian light aircraft, and there is not the amount of air defense in the world to protect all of these interchanges, all these depots, as well as military facilities, storage for ammunition, all of that too. So we will continue to see things going bang. I'm more than sure of that. But let's talk about heavy lift drones lifting things like munitions, like fabs. UAC, United Aircraft Company, of course, who build things like the Su-34, they released this footage, I think it was from February last year. I'm 95% I showed this on the video as well. And this is showing a heavy lift, more traditional style drone. At least when I think drone, I think quad rotor little thing. Of course, it's just anything remote controlled. Like, this is as much of a drone as this, but of course doesn't have capacity for, hovering and vertical takeoff and landing. And we saw this video come out. Now, their claims in this, you can see it lifting up here, was that it could lift 300 kilograms and go as far as 500 kilometers. Now, of course, there's a lot of military applications for this, from logistics to casualty evacuation to dropping something like this on not a one-way mission. So I do think we will start to see more and more heavy lift style drones coming into play in warfare. Drone technology is accelerating so quickly, so probably sooner rather than later. I am 98% sure there was a video of one of those with a fab, not dropping it in combat, dropping it in training, but I can't find that absolutely for the life of me. But I'm sure there would have been some testing done on that. I know a lot of guys in the drone world, and the amount of lift they can get out of these small electric motors can be unbelievable. Some of them easily lifting men, and even lifting 3, 4, 5 jerry cans as well, jerry cans full of water or fuel, to get it into locations as well as ammunition. So let's have a look at the maps. And of course, we have a lot to go because we missed a couple of days. Of course, in the center of your screen, you have Ukraine, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2004. 14. Now, we have a couple of days to look over, so we will roll back onto yesterday, and what you're going to see is any red check, ground that Russia is making over the past 24 hours. Now, how much ground has Russia made in January? Of course, is the 31st today. I cannot believe that we're almost in February 2025. I'm still signing everything wrong. So, by Deep State's numbers, we'll get war mappers probably in about a week, about 314 kilometre squares. Now, how much is this in comparison to months prior? Okay, then this is over 2024. So, we're sitting between basically July and August's numbers here. This August is when we really started to see this really climb. Of course, December we saw a fall back. January we saw then a further pull back. Still significant amount of ground compared to the war before 2024. But what I will say is December, January, February, I'm not surprised at all to see these lower numbers. I actually thought that we would see numbers in the 100, 200 or around net zero. I'm still surprised to see a 300 kilometre square gain over the month. March, April, if the war is still continuing then, which I think most likely it is. I haven't seen anything presented, whether from Washington, the Kremlin or Kyiv, that would realistically put an end to this now, just because the positions are so far away. But if we get into March, April, when the weather starts improving, I think we will see these climb back up, maybe even beyond what we saw in November and October, because of course, when you're dealing with a slowed down movement, front line, but not the positions aren't as dynamic, what you're going to end up with is that increase of artillery. And if the weather gets colder and worse, it's actually better for those fighter aircraft to deliver those munitions on target, as well as we know those manpower shortages are not going to be fixed by then, if they're possible to be fixed. So I do believe in March, April, we may see then a further increase in ground. If the Russian forces can maintain their high level of offensive actions we are seeing. So this was yesterday. Let's have a look. We do have a lot of red check on this map. Firstly, let's look at Rozliv. What we see is some ground being made by the Russian forces here. Rozliv sits right in between Velyka Novosilka and Kursk. Of course, we've seen them move up on this front. If we go from here to here, an advancement of about 2.7 kilometres. Now, we can confirm this because multiple other maps are showing this. So we have Divgen showing same direction. This is actually, I believe, their map update today, but again, we can confirm this, as well as Mr. AMK Mapping. You can find him on Telegram and X here. Southern flank of Andriivka. Russian forces advance in the direction of the village of Rozliv, showing very, very similar in here. So we can definitely confirm this movement. Now, what we're going to do is then just move to the east a little bit. Now, forget about Andriivka at the second. I want to talk about the movements from the north of Sukhryali and Dashny. So what we're going to look at, this is yesterday, and then jump up to today, and we don't have any more movement in here. So let's compare the maps to show in this direction here. So we need to talk about this pocket. Movement towards out from the north of Sukhryali or north of Konstantinovsky as well, in and around here. Now, these are showing that was definitely movement in here. This map shows, Divgen shows, more up to about where this tree line is here, a difference of 350 metres realistically is negligible, but that is what they are saying. Of course, this is in that whole Kursk pocket that has been and is now developed. Then AMK mapping, he also shows this movement here. His is more in line with Deep States than with Divgen's, but it's important to have a look. The advanced positions along several tree lines are pushing into the adjacent forest plantation that runs south of the gully. This area is already in grey zone, so we will see. But when we talk about this area, what we're really looking at is that this pocket is then moving and collapsing as well. Let's talk about Dashny just for a second before we talk about what WTF is happening in Andriivka. So let's have a look. That's not the one I want. This is the one right here. So Divgen, they are showing movement into these areas. Remember, I showed you footage yesterday of Russian forces. We see right where this like red roof is. That's the best way to see it on low resolution maps. There was definitely movement in here, and he's showing movement through these outer blocks up to this road, as well as on the south. So all in all, we get a pretty good idea of how Dashny may be looking. Right, so now we have the island boys, the Russian island boys hanging out in Andriivka. So what is actually the case in here? I've said it for now the best part of a week. I believe this is looking like this. As soon as we step into February for February updates, I think we may see this close up. But we see today movement through Shevchenko towards then Andriivka. And then yesterday we see then Andriivka. We're focusing on this. So we see movement to the south of Andriivka and then movement here yesterday. So there's movement in here, movement here. Now, this may be grey zone. There may not be actual control, but as far as ability to supply logistics and stuff, it is looking like that because there are gains being made in here, and more maps are showing that this is actually connected in here. That is all red zone. At this point in time, if you ask me, if I was a betting man, would I say this is red or grey? I would say that it is red. But let's talk about Andriivka. Of course, we know there's a lot of reports that there are Russian forces almost up into Ulaki. We can't confirm that, of course. We have a look. DivGen map. Now, what he is showing is basically the same as yesterday. See, this red check is in here. Perfect. Shows across both maps. We get an idea that that movement definitely occurred. But of course, what it's not showing, the Deep State is not showing this because of this major defensive work sitting at this purple and in this purple right here that have likely come under control. Now, we need to look further at Andriivka. Let's step through to today. See this movement out in this direction. We see that this is showing slightly different. See where the vulture turns up to the northeast, that they are saying from the defensive work here, that they are saying is under control down this tree line, that the Russians have had a southerly push all the way down to here, of course, in the direction of Ulaki. So basically, the other maps are showing more something like this at the moment down in this direction. So wait out and see for confirmation or geolocation, but I think that is likely just with the lay of the ground, the fortifications in here, and the Russian troops being able to actually remain in that island. We see AMK mapping. This is in the same direction as we saw that red check, so we can confirm there was definitely movement in that direction. Here's showing as well where those fortifications would sit, that there has been Russian advances also. Let's move up into Pokrovsk. Now we see Yasnovi, Srebini, we see movement being made out here and the occupation of this area. Remember, DivGen showed ground being made in this direction over the past couple of days. Pokrovsk, western flank, Kotlini in here, that the Russians are occupying more of this area, but there was also I can delete this one now because I've remembered. The Deep State is reporting that there was a successful Ukrainian counter-attack in this direction too. So see this tree line where my cursor is at the moment, from yesterday to today, that we have seen a movement back from there. But as around Pokrovsk, not too much at the moment. One thing I will say about Pokrovsk is I do believe as many resources as possible will be funneled into here to try and stop Russia getting Udashny and moving into Dnipro Oblast, as well as this mine here. We are hearing that there's a lot of withdrawals of the civilians around these areas too, expecting large Russian attacks. Let's move down into Velyka Novosilka, where we can see that there has been no movement on this map now for a couple of days. Of course, after the fall and the confirmed fall of this area. Let's talk about this on AMK. Now, here's showing very similar to what we thought that we would see, is that the Russians would move up to the Nokryali using this as a buffer, as well as the Ukrainians falling back across that to use this obstacle as a geographical fortification, also, so that you have to cross this as well. Will we see the Russians successfully move on the other side of this? Well, time will tell. But As far as then the ability to defend these open areas after this is going to be very, very difficult. So if we see that his map is correct and the Russians are somewhat up into here, and we do see a successful crossing, I think it is likely we'll see a lot of this come under control reasonably or relatively quickly. But wait out, because we can't confirm any of that at this point in time. Now, Toretsk, we see movement being made from Nelipivka up to Lenadivka as well. Now, Suryak has been showing that the Russian forces are up into Lenadivka now for over a month or so. There is some geolocated footage up here, but the only Telegram chat that I could find that had the geolocation, when I clicked on to go find the video to see what it was, I wasn't part of the chat, so I can't actually see it. But what we do know is for sure there has been movement in that direction. Now, there has been a lot of people pushing back on, is Toretsk completely occupied? There's been a lot of people claiming that it is on the high 90%, and other people come out and say, and defending, say, no, it is not. Suryak, remember, has shown that the grey zone here is basically in line with where his red zone is. Now, AMK is showing this. If we bring this up, we look at one of these spoil piles. Now, this is the spoil pile right out in this direction here that he's saying the Russian forces have had further movement out of here, capturing the Toretsk mines, therefore completing the capture of the city. So he is saying that the Russians have captured Toretsk. Ukrainian forces have been holding out their last stronghold on the territory of Toretsk mines for some time now, and just recently Russian forces advanced from their positions in the southern buildings, pushing Ukraine out. They also captured a small park in the forest. This is 0.24 kilometre squares for Russia. Now, if AMK added his kilometre squares after the month, that would be great to add to the Deep State War Mapper and himself as well. We've talked a lot about these spoil hills. We have multiple of them over Toretsk. We have a lot of them in areas like Pokrovsk. All the mining areas have these high points. Now, we've talked a lot about this as it can help for observation, potential radios too. But I got this off a contact of mine too. Your points on the spoil hills, which also can be called tailings or slag heaps, are often quite high in metallic compounds. That could amplify the effects of terrain on electronic systems. The smelter I worked at had one heap about 1 kilometre square and about 50 metres high. We estimate it to be about 10% metal content. That with the massive electric substation messed around with radios. So if you've ever tried to use a compass under power lines or near something that could be magnetic or massive bit of steel, it can have a lot of effect. And these types can have an effect too on electronic equipment. Talking to this, it could be likely to actually reduce the range of communications beyond that. The greater the density of the slag, it does a better job of blocking radio waves, which makes the high ground way more important than ever with things like drones, because these are beyond them, of course, or trying to come back over them. So say there's a Russian, say this slag heap right here, if a Russian drone is trying to go this way, it can be greatly stopped. But if the Russians can gain these areas going this way, you're going to have more problems as well. These high points from everything from mortar fire to electronic equipment, from electronic warfare to radios to drones, are very, very important. So let's move up then. Chasiv Yar, we didn't see any movement. Oh no, sorry, we did see movement yesterday. Sorry, I was a bit confused on myself. Have I missed anything else yesterday? We missed some areas around Pokrovsk yesterday. Uspanivka, I showed you this from DivGen map, as well as this movement of Novo and Rivkia. DivGen as well showed that with that movement. Let's go up into then, Kotlini advancement. Don't worry, close enough. We know where the map is moving. Chasiv Yar yesterday showed this movement in here, which we do know from geolocations as well as other maps, these forests were coming under control of the Russian forces. The only thing I will say on this though is we did see right out to about here movement of Russian forces outside of grey zone geolocated footage. So we do have some updates around Chasiv Yar. And remember, let's start from north and we'll head south. Let's come up to today's map. In here, from other maps, it showed that the Russian forces had this, Ukrainian forces had a pushback, and the Russian forces, according to DivGen today, have retaken some of these areas on the far western side. Again, some people are claiming that Chasiv Yar has come completely under Russian control. All of the mappers that I look at, no one is claiming that so far. Now, in the centre of Chasiv Yar, in this direction right in here, AMK map is showing that the Russian forces marginally advanced in Chasiv Yar, capturing important Ukrainian positions. Chasiv Yar is very, very important. In the north, they advanced from positions in the low-rise, capturing Ukrainian strongholds in the stadium. In the south, the Russians advanced, capturing 2 more 3-story buildings and have reached the city hospital number 3. So don't underestimate how important this is, especially with the terrain here. The lack of high ground in and around these areas on the way to Konstantinivka and Kramatorsk, if Chasiv Yar completely comes under Russian control, and then they are able to exploit this. Let's come back down into Chasiv Yar. Now, you're going to have to just line up a couple of things, see where this reservoir is. Down in this direction just here, this is where AMK mapping is showing that the 331st Regiment advanced in this direction by the Russian forces. And I don't know if we saw, no, not much movement of grey zone in here. So that is interesting to look at and see where things are shifting on the maps. Now, let's come up into Seversk. What I showed you, I think the day before yesterday, was geolocated footage of the Russians just about here. We have these 2 verticals, so it was just to the west of there, close enough to this in the green zone. So definitely it should at least be grey. The DivGen map is showing in this direction. See, 2 verticals just on the eastern side of that he's showing this has come under control, but as well a long way down as well, down to where this tree line meets also, but also showing that further down to the south is under control as well. So I agree with that. Given the geolocation that we did see in this direction. Okay, let's come into Kursk, where even the most NAFO accounts, some of them are saying that 2/3 of what Ukraine did hold in Kursk has been lost back to the Russian forces in this direction. And we know that there are pushes in here. Even if we don't see much, there definitely are. So let's have a look and see where things are changing. So the best way to line this up is have a look at where Guevo is in here, where this creek or river is running, where it loops back hard east and then around to the northwest, as well as where these like 3 fingers of tree lines are. So basically showing that this area where my cursor is tracing at the moment is coming under control, and AMK saying that the Russian forces are on the outskirts of this Guevo in the north, which his map is lining up to. We'll wait and see what other maps line up and show this, and or if we get geolocations in the future. So let's talk about, do we want to do the EU's return to Russian gas or oil strikes? Let's talk about oil strikes here. So we get this footage as well. So this is said to be a strike on the Druzhba pipeline or interchange last night. Again, with any of this, what we say is wait for imagery, satellite imagery, because of the highly flammable substances going through either gas or oil. Seeing it burn, the plumes of smoke, whatever, it can be a little bit deceptive to some of the damage. Like we saw yesterday with that large oil depot that everyone was, it's fully destroyed, and then there was 4 tanks at most had actually dumped their amount of oil. Where is the Druzhba? So let's have a look here. Bryansk. Now this is where that drone with the fab on it was said to be working. And what we know is Ukraine is looking to strike all pipelines, oil and gas, leading west, leading into the EU, of course, where Russia is making a lot of money. But of course, where Europe is taking advantage of cheap energy to stay competitive on international markets. So around this area. Now from Bryansk, we have Moscow, of course, leading up in this direction. This will become more relevant when we talk about the Ust-Luga port shipping out oil. Okay. Oil flows through Russia's Baltic Sea port of Ust-Luga appeared to pause, backing up Kyiv's claims of successful drone strike on a pumping station. It's not this far up, the pumping station is further back. It would present a significant new supply threat for global oil market if it were to be confirmed that Ukrainian drone strikes have damaged the pipeline system feeding Ust-Luga, halting oil shipments from the port for a prolonged period. But again, short-term effect, the price of oil probably increases, buffering that loss for a short amount of time. What we looked at in the second half of the video yesterday was even if within 1,000 kilometres all the Russian oil areas get taken out, you're talking from a 2 to 7% overall GDP loss. It's a lot, but unlike some are claiming, it's not going to collapse the entire economy, but it can have effect on civilian uprisings, as well as the ability to maintain the pace of the war. Now, a person with knowledge of the deliveries said the Ust-Luga flows dropped to 0 on Jan 29. Shipping data seen by Bloomberg indicate a tanker left early Wednesday, although there is a gap in vessel signals after that. Neither provided a reason for the apparent decline, and there can be periods when ships don't load anyway. So is this just a period ships aren't loading because they're just not loading for some other reason, some admin reason? Is it because the pipeline has been stopped and they don't have anything to load on? Well, we don't know. But what we can see is you're looking at the black or grey in this, the loading schedule. We can see a decline in this too. So yeah, it's hard to know. We can see a decline in all three. So again, hard to know, but I'll show you some more stuff. A Ukrainian security official said on Wednesday that the nation's drones had struck Russia's Andriopol pumping station on the Baltic pipeline system 2, which feeds the Ust-Luga, causing the link to halt. Now, this is rough. Now, I can't zoom in on this. I don't know why. Can someone please tell me why sometimes I can zoom and sometimes I can't? So we have Kyiv here, approximately 500 kilometres to Andriopol, where this pumping station is. Very, very rough numbers. And then we have to the port of Ust-Luga. Of course, this is Estonia and Finland here. If you ever want a good time, Turku is one of the best cities I've ever got drunk in my life. Anyway, up in here, this is where Ust-Luga is, and that this connection between Andriopol and here has been potentially disrupted. This port handled about 650,000 barrels a day of crude last year, or 20% of Russia's total seaborne flows. It's still possible that there are barrels in storage available to load, cushioning the impact of any curtailment. So even if that pipeline has closed, it's paused or destroyed, however, there may still be barrels there to load onto ships to get out, or pump onto ships. Flows from the port had slumped without explanation in recent weeks. The timing of that decline coincided with when an unspecified and temporary incident happened at the Unetcha pump station to the east of Belarus that was reported by the Belta news agency at the time. So, again, Belta is Belarusian state media. It's always hard to know what has happened in here. Is it coincidence? It seems like an awful coincidence. Is it not? Has something been hit? Well, we do know that Ukraine is trying to cut Russian oil and gas. Now, before we talk about Romania and the presidency there, well, the presidential vote here, we talk a lot about gas, oil, Russian cheap energy flowing to Europe that Ukraine desperately want to stop. America want to stop, one, to have better successes in Ukraine, but secondly, because they buy, then the EU is forced to buy American oil, which is significantly, American LNG, which is significantly more important. And the Financial Times had this today. EU debates return to Russian gas as part of Ukraine's peace deal. European officials are debating whether Russian pipeline gas sales to the EU should be restarted as a part of a potential settlement to end the war against Ukraine. Remember, the stick isn't working, so there's going to have to be a carrot. People don't like that, but unless you can get a bigger fucking stick, and I don't know how, you're going to have to get a fucking carrot. You're going to have to pull one out of the fucking ground or out of your ass, which may be pipelines. Advocates of buying Russian gas argue it would bring down high energy prices in Europe, encourage Moscow to the negotiating table, and give both sides a reason to implement and maintain a ceasefire. So, Moscow, we'll cut your gas again if you breach this, but we get cheaper prices as well, so bring you in. But raising the idea of reopening flows of Russian gas into Europe, even in preliminary discussions, has already sparked a backlash among Ukraine's closest allies in the EU. Remember, you're not allowed to bring up other ideas other than the official narrative. 3 of the officials briefed on the talk said an idea had been endorsed by some German and Hungarian officials, with support from other capitals that saw it as a way to reduce European energy costs. We know energy in Europe has skyrocketed. Of course, this affects Europe's competitiveness, also affects your cost of living and your way of living too. There is pressure from some big member states on energy prices, and this is one way to bring those down, of course. Resuming exports to Europe would significantly boost Moscow's revenues. Again, if they don't stop the war, boost the revenue to continue. But what they're trying to do is put this as we will stop the flow again, or we'll start the flow again, we'll restart it if you come to the table for some sort of ceasefire. Before the war, Russia accounted for 40% of the EU's total supplies, with Germany being the largest importer. I wonder how that stopped. Donald Trump has demanded an end to the war soon, prompting discussions among Western capitals about the elements needed for a lasting agreement with Moscow. The US president has also threatened the EU with tariffs unless it buys more LNG from America, which is more expensive than piped gas. I don't give a shit what any European leaders say about the price of gas from America is cheaper than from Russia. What they're getting at is they're saying it's cheaper geopolitically. It's not cheaper monetarily. Monetarily, in a global economy, does have impacts on your competitiveness. The whole Western world is struggling to stay competitive on fucking anything at the moment with China. Even in areas where we thought, like AI and tech, we're getting proved wrong pretty bloody quickly. If you want to know why is this more expensive, okay, you're going to need to go and water your plants 100 metres away. You can either take a hose or fill up your watering can. That's the most simple way. But before filling your water can and emptying it, you have to then turn it, you have to liquefy it or deliquefy it as well. Floating the resumption of pipeline sales from Russia has infuriated Brussels, no shit, and diplomats from some Eastern European countries. From some Eastern European countries, not all of them. Because, of course, this helps Russia's economy massive. Billions of dollars. One of the officials said it's madness. How stupid can we be to even think about that as an option? And I would say there is high chances that the pipeline might go boom again. Zelensky said on Wednesday, ending the hot phase of the war is critical. Diplomatic solutions are preferable. Fewer casualties, fewer losses. But also he wants to be in a position of power at those, so we don't know how this is going to hold up. The revival of the debate on gas sales has unsettled some US LNG exporters seeking to sign long-term supply deals with European companies. Of course, they want 10, 15-year contracts with these companies, and of course, this can undercut that because it's going to be cheaper. And if you think that a large industrial company gives a shit about where the molecules in their gas are coming from, I'm sorry, but they don't. Individuals in the company might not, but the bottom line of financials, they don't want the cheapest possible. If North Korea was selling cheap gas, people would be going, if there weren't sanctions on it, we'd buy that. They fear that any restart of Ukrainian transit could make their products uncompetitive, according to two of the officials. So that if they restart this, US LNG is not going to be, Trump is not going to be happy with that, and what we are seeing more and more and more is how much Zelensky is pushing this idea, everything Trump put forward, because he knows he needs US support. So you'll see Zelensky brown-nosing Trump a little bit, which is what he needs to do in this. He needs to keep US support. If US support stops, European support cannot backfill this, especially with the lack of energy and cheap energy that Europe will have. Okay, let's talk about Romania, and there's a couple points in this when you talk about the election, what happened there, and also ends to the war. And we've mentioned before Mr. Calin Georgescu, who of course won the presidency, or looking like he was going to win, and then that got turned over very quickly by courts and annulled the elections. A bit of a, oh shit, he might actually win. So let's talk about that, and we'll talk about what some comments he has made. Now, of course, he called Ukraine a fictional state. He claimed that the eventual partition of its territories are inevitable, and 100% this will happen. It is inevitable. Now, we need to talk about that, and we also need to talk about some other bits of him getting annulled too. But he's saying that the world is changing, borders will change, and that we're still Hungarians, referring to Ukrainian regions that border Romania. He's also claimed and suggested that Poland would annex areas in the west of Ukraine as well. And of course, this has gone down like a fucking lead balloon, saying 100% that's how it will be. Well, they have no other way. So, of course, Romania share the single longest border with Ukraine. And speaking of that, other Eastern European countries are going to move into Ukraine and hold parts of that. Now, not in a hot invasion. Of course, any movement can become hot very quickly, but as a movement in to gain those territories, but also bring them under then NATO and EU umbrella. And this has been raised now for years, and we raised it again the other day as well. Now, how would this actually look? Okay, so some of the countries that are not, on the sort of EU train at the moment, EU and NATO train, as far as on upholding that narrative to 100%. Slovakia, Hungary, and, well, if he gets into power in Romania, which if an election happens, it looks like he will, but the election he may be barred from doing. So let's just say Slovakia and Hungary. And of course, this is Russia out here. So what is basically being suggested, and what has been suggested before, he's not the first one to bring this up, was that an area of Ukraine becomes an autonomous state, like an autonomous republic, under another NATO or EU state, effectively grandfathering this area into NATO and the EU without Ukraine itself having to join. Poland or Hungary or Romania or whoever is already part of this, and that border's just shifting. So it can't be, well, Ukraine's not joining, an autonomous republic that we are claiming is. And is that a way to get that the protections of this? Because if that were to happen, if Poland were to expand there, Slovakia, Hungary can't veto this, and Russia's going to have no choice. It really fucks their goals of the war over too. So people saying, is this realistic now that even Zelensky has said returning these areas militarily is now not possible? And how it may look is everything west of the Dnipro will become in this sort of blue autonomous controlled NATO EU area under whoever's flag, I guess, overhead. Autonomous regions, if you look through the UN, it's hard to tell, like, how autonomous is it from another state? That's difficult. We're going to find out more of that if the war ends and there actually are, like, more votes for autonomy in Crimea and Donetsk and Luhansk. And then to the east of Dnipro would be under Ukrainian government control, but it would be a demilitarized zone seen by the white on this map, and that what is under the Russian control here would be demilitarized as well to some degree. I don't know. But this is basically what it is saying. But of course, what this does, it's not ideal at all. This divides up Ukraine. This is exactly what Ukrainian Zelensky do not want. But there's a lot of people saying, is there any other option to quickly get into NATO and the EU? Potentially this blue line of the Dnipro could move all the way up to where occupied territories will be, maybe forcing a diplomatic solution in the the long term. And when I showed you a very similar to map the other day, one of my contacts reached out to me and goes, it actually makes sense. And I remember this coming up 2 years ago or more. It would be quite the masterstroke of European unity, making those agreements for how long it would stay a protectorate and such would be a bit of fun. Of course, there's going to be a lot of nationalist elements both in Hungary, in Poland, and in Ukraine who do not want this to happen. There's a lot of bad blood historically sitting there. But it would definitely pull the rug out from under Russia and would actually fuck them over as now NATO is closer to Moscow than ever. And yes, I guess you've stopped Ukraine, entering NATO, but NATO is then right up on your border further. Funnily enough, the map you drew is very close to the Chinese peace plan map that they submitted. We've gone through that 6-point peace plan from, I don't know, forget about the peace plans and victory plans. They're about, the governments make out as much of them as the voice to Parliament in Australia, for those familiar with that. It was all the rage, and then it's like, that never happened. We never brought that up. So let's talk about, though, the Romanian elections. I think this is important. Now, this is from Kiev Independent. The obscure pro-Russian ultranationalist achieved a shock success during the first rounds of a presidential vote in November 2024, making him as frontrunner for the second round. The results were annulled by the Constitutional Court over alleged Russian interference and a alleged hybrid campaign on TikTok meant to prop up Ceausescu. Now, he still remains the leading candidate for the scheduled vote in May with 38% of projected support. So he's still the favourite, but will he be able to run? Well, we don't know. My question would be, though, if there is interference, how much interference was there? Or is democracy only democratic when it aligns with the remainder of EU and NATO policy as well? Because we see that Zelensky, Ukrainian president, has been hosting the opposition of Robert Fico's government, the more liberal opposition from Hungary. He's been hosting them in Ukraine, as well as he's been promoting that opposition through the protests / riots that are occurring all over, Slovakia, I apologise. He's been hosting the Slovakian opposition, as well as promoting the protests that have been happening in Slovakia as well. So where is interference? Where is foreign interference on this? So again, we will see. Now, this is something that I missed here, but we went over this. This talks about the map. Don't worry about that. But we're talking about Ceausescu then not being allowed to run. Now, let's go over this Reuters article here. Romanian far-right presidential candidate leads in polls ahead of May vote. Remember, anything that, if you have any other views to this, you are funneled and pigeonholed as being a straight-up extremist. Now, Romanian far-right pro-Russian presidential candidate Karlan Georgescu remained voters' top choice ahead of a rerun of presidential election in May. The survey comes 1 month after the European Union's state top court annulled the presidential election in which Georgescu was the frontrunner 2 days before the second round, citing allegations of Russian interference in his favour. Now, this is one of these things. I see with this, if he is allowed to run, if he's not allowed to run, I think there's going to be protests in the street. But if he's allowed to run, it's going to be like when they tried to kill Trump. You've now assured his victory. And those two, I won't say the word, who tried to take out Trump, they had more impact on getting him elected than anyone else did. So the top court annulled this in what I believe, to my knowledge, is the first time an EU presidential election has been annulled. The cancellation came after state documents showed Georgescu, a critic of NATO who has praised Romania's 1930s fascist leaders, had benefited from an unfair social media campaign likely to have been orchestrated by Russia, accusations Moscow has denied. So the social media campaign through TikTok, they're saying, was orchestrated by Russia to promote him. Okay? The rerun election will take place on May 4th, with the second round on then the 18th of May. It remains unclear whether Georgescu, who opposes Romanian support for Ukraine against Russia's invasion, will be allowed to run for president again. But remember, with whatever he's saying, whether there's some influence there or not, whatever he's saying in Romania is obviously being felt by a lot of Romanians as well. Remember, your parents aren't on TikTok. Your grandparents aren't on TikTok. In October of last year, a top court banned another far-right politician from running in a move critics said overstepped court powers. So, yeah, there's a lot here banning people to run. Again, it's only democratic when you agree with the democracy happening. We see that, of course, with what occurred in the US. Romania has the longest land border with Ukraine of any European Union or NATO member state. It has helped export millions of tons of Ukrainian grain through its Black Sea port of Constanta, trained Ukrainian fighter pilots, and donated a Patriot air defence batteries. But what I will say, this Russian interference thing, I'm not saying that it isn't there. I think we should probably assume in any elections from now on that there is foreign interference from many, many different parties. Because, of course, in a global economy, in geopolitics, a move here can affect a move there, and there is a shitload of interference, I'm sure, happening. But what we need to look into is how much actual effect is this happening. So let's say it's TikTok. Okay, it's affecting younger people. Younger people tend to be more liberal, who therefore, from my looking at this war, the more liberal people will tend to be more pro-Ukraine than your more traditionalist, maybe conservatives who are not going to be on TikTok, who are older. So how much effect is it having? If he's 38% the front runner and there's a 2 to 5% influence change that you might be able to put down to, that I think we just need to take into account that America's going to be looking on other elections, China and Russia and India and Australia, and everyone is going to have some level of interference. We talked about Slovakia just before and how that could be seen as interference. But Russian interference has become a silver bullet for calling into question the authenticity of any elections, even down to cancelling them and banning people from running in them as well. Trump? But as of yet, with both cases, I have not seen any rock-solid evidence of interference. If anyone's got any, send it across. I will definitely have a look. It sounds like something intelligence services will definitely do. I'm not doubting that. But if we assume it is, to how much success is that actually having? But on the reverse side of this, you've actually given China and Russia a bit of a trump card, for want of a better term, because you've sort of given them the silver bullet now that they can actually ruin any politician that they want now. Is they can leak some documents, or they can tweak the algorithm to show favoritism, and they'll have that person booted. So imagine if Macron is running against fucking Willy, Le Willy in France, and they go, would rather Le Willy in power rather than Macron. Right, well, we know how the EU is going to react to this, so let's just dump some documents, or we'll push the algorithm a little bit and change this. So the consequences of allowing this to absolutely get into the fabric of democracy is hard. But how do we stop that too? How do we stop TikTok just pushing one candidate or pushing this or that? It's hard to know. But my question all comes down to, I think we need to assume that in any election there's going to be foreign interference, and what we need to do is look at, well, what percentage of impact is that actually having? We know intelligence agencies, governments, they want the best possible outcomes for their own, what they see as their world orders. And there is going to be, in the 20th century, there was the fight for between democratic capitalism, communism, fascism. I think the 21st century, and I probably won't be here to see it, but will be the fight between having a unipolar or multipolar world. That is something that we see, China gaining dominance very quickly, and the Western world struggling to remain competitive. They're not struggling to remain competitive in industry, we're fucking way behind, but with technical edge as well, as the developing world increases. The one good byproduct of this for everyone, and everyone should be happy about this, is that more people than ever are getting lifted out of abject, absolute poverty. Anyway, we will see what occurs. Legends, you have a fantastic rest of your day. Have a fantastic weekend, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.